Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another animation analysis video. I mentioned a few weeks ago now that I was going to be getting to this Ambience Synesthesia preview, and I was going to give it a look-see because everyone was talking about the animation in it and how good it was, and I didn't realize it was only about 2 minutes, so I probably could have gotten to this a little earlier. I didn't even look it up beforehand, but you know what I mean. I'm a mess. If you couldn't tell by my hair, seasons are changing, humidity's getting thick, and so is my skull apparently. So without further ado, let's see what this preview is all about and then get to the animation stuff, shall we? Let's go. Ooh, oh. That was a high quality render right off the bat. Where has this quality been? Oh, the soft light. Oh man. Oh man. Oh no. This might be a long video anyway. Dude, the compositing in this is nuts too. Like, the effects passes. The animation's beautiful, of course, but the post-effect work is nuts. Who did they hire for this? Okay. Alright. Like, the song is fire too, but the animation, it's kind of what I'm here for, huh? But Jesus. I'm gonna have way too much to talk about on this. Jesus Christ. I thought this was going to be a shorter video. This might end up being like 20 minutes. Holy shit. For starters, just the detail going on in the background here, like all of these statues and everything happening here, the hand especially with that soft edge shadow on that, just beautiful. I'm pretty sure all these assets back here are 2D. None of them look like they'd be CG. It'd be kind of silly to do all of that in a model and then just use it for the one shot, frankly, especially when it's so far back, even though it's so detailed, which is why I'm still like baffled. There's so much detail to these. And there's also all this beautiful compositing work, all this post-lighting effect work going on here, like all of these God rays coming in here. And for those who don't know what God rays are, it's basically just the clever term for the light that shines through windows and like through the haze where you can see the whole beam of light coming down. It's just the fancy term for that. But the way that like the light's coming in is extremely well balanced, and the fact that it actually like reflects a shadow off the top of the piano here, like that detail, that level of attention is nuts. I also love the design of this like piano down here, the base of this, the whole stand and everything. That's just kind of cool. It's not really so much an animation thing, not really a cinematography thing. It just looks neat. I love a good design. That's kind of cool. But yeah, like this is just one of the first quick shots, these one-off like boom, get them out of here shots, that it immediately made me go, oh no, this is going to be a long video, and it's probably going to be as a result. Another quick compositing thing here that I just love that they did. Of course, you got the, once again, soft edge on the light. You know, you're not having harsh light on the face. It would kind of dissipate. It would be lost in the skin, you know, like the skin reflects and absorbs light, and it would roll off kind of naturally like that. And that's not something that a lot of 2D focused animations tend to do too often, because it takes so much time to like really nail it to the exact perspective of the face and where the cheek is, especially in this context. So it's just not a common thing to have that, and I love that they have that. And they even have the hard line of the hair being reflected there by the hard line on the face. And then you even have all these little speckles around here. That's all dust, and that free floats around the screen, and that's just a really nice additional, like, that's a spice on the meal, you know? Like, you don't have to toss that on the top a lot of of the time, but it does make everything feel a little bit more, you know, like loose, a little bit dirty, you know, because it's dust, obviously, but it also has a dreamlike effect because of that like sparkling that dust can do in the right lighting conditions. And with that like cool moonlight coming through, it's just such a neat aesthetic, and I'm really glad they added that dust there, because this could have been a cool shot anyway, but it just adds a little bit of seasoning on the top. It's a nice little addition that I really do respect. Now, immediately following that, there's this amazing render here. This is nuts, the detail on this one, but it's mostly because of the sheer detail on whatever the hell that is. I have no clue what that is, just an ornamental like glass pane covering or something, but it looks great. Having the like night sky, like all of the stars and everything, and the reflection down here, and only in the shadow, not anywhere out here so much. If there is, it's covered entirely by the light composited on top. They threw a bunch of like these ball things around here. I don't know why, but they definitely help with the reflections and make everything feel a little bit more tight up. Like you can really nail them into the scene. They don't feel like they don't belong. They just set right in there. And all of this over here has a lot of detail as well. This has been a thing recently where a lot of animations I look at have very detailed foliage for some reason, and I'm not mad about it. It's just kind of an interesting thing. Like it's like a trend that's coming around, is high detailed backgrounds and set pieces, and I love it. I love that because there's just so much detail to be had. A lot of this would usually, in a more traditional workflow, get lost because of time or the sheer effort it would take to put all that detail into something that's just effectively a throwaway shot moving to another more important piece. So I love that detail. And only a couple of frames away from this one, which I'll just kind of pop through here real quick instead of cutting away, these, of course, gorgeous. I love good water, and there's that really, really nice shot of the wave later in, but like, this is beautiful. This is animated so well. The scattering of the water in every single direction, and the fact that they composited these little shines on everything is just another little spice on top of it. Make it really pop. I love the colors on this as well. The yellow's not too yellow. It's got kind of a green tint to it, so that fits really well into the whole color language of the shot, as well as the ones that follow it when we get to, of course, the next shot where there's like two of them, I believe. Like, there's so many good things about the way that they handled all the effects animation, especially in this one, all the post work and compositing. This is another one that has a beautiful God ray coming through here that just kind of takes up most of that center beam and just really directs your attention through this. You're following this straight through these flowers here. Just gorgeous, gorgeous attention to detail. I love where this is going, and I'm afraid for the length of this video overall as a result. I'm only 20 seconds in. And of course, immediately following that, because this doesn't know how to stop, this hand is gorgeous. I can't fully tell if it was a CG hand or a like live action footage that the animator had recorded of themselves doing this motion, but the way that this hand kind of softly rotates here after it drags through this water, on which I assume is water at least, it kind of just has this little tiny itsy bitsy turn right there. And you can kind of see it bounce a smidge right around where the knuckle is. And that's a very telling factor of rotoscope animation, especially because you're trying to follow a different movement from a different source, and it can definitely cause those sorts of inconsistencies when you're following it, especially when it comes to lighting. And while it still looks beautiful, and I do not want to minimize the direction they went here, it looks great. That's why I'm focusing on it. It might sound like I'm building up to a but I'm not. This is the way to do it and get it to look perfectly, like down to the pixel, just right when it comes to the movement, the weight of the hand. That's why I feel like this was probably a rotoscope of a live action hand doing the motion, because the weight of the hand feels so real. Whereas for CG, even if you're really good at CG, you probably wouldn't get that weight perfectly down, and the natural weight of the hand is the only way to like truly feel that out. Even a CG artist would probably have a reference of a real hand doing the same thing, so on and so forth. References are insanely important, and this is a perfect prime example of how well you can utilize that artistically if you're clever about your shot composition and you're clever about your usage. Now this shot here just has, once again, beautiful composition on the lighting especially. The movement is very fluid. You don't really feel the choppiness of the movements happening, especially in the hand and the neck, because everything around it pulls everything else together. Nothing feels out of place. The color separation between the background and the hair, the color of tan that her face is here, it drives a straight visual line between the background and where she is on frame, so it just feels so solid. All that negative space is taken up by a very pleasing color that matches closely to her own hair color in its own way. And then you have the eyes that are basically the same as the background. And then, of course, again, another great example of that soft shading, that composite lighting, which just looks great. Vivi Fluorite Ice Song, the anime that came out, I think, a year or two ago, had a lot of this similar soft shade on a lot of its shots that it wanted to focus on the face. And I love that they did that because, again, it's not a thing that's super common yet, and as such makes everything look that much higher quality and that much more effort taken to get it to look like that. It's just a really nice little spice on top of everything else, just like the dust. It's like that's getting more common, seeing dust in more animated stuff that's even not super high quality of animation. Compositing tricks are going to continue to improve over time for everyone, and this, I think, might be the next trendy one, is to have this like half soft shade light on the faces, on arms, stuff like that. These little tiny differences in their approach visually to make things just that much more striking because it feels that much more realistic. So I did have to skip a few things, mostly because the stuff I was going to say is stuff I've already talked about with prior shots, so it's not that big of a deal to lose it, but also because I am legitimately worried about the length of this video. I don't know how long this is going to be, and I don't want to spend extra minutes kind of retreading the same ground. So this one is kind of unique in a very specific way, where you can see the fingers, of course, trailing on the piano, the CG piano, the 2D hand, which this time I don't actually think is a rotoscope or a CG draw over. I think that this is straight 2D purely by the way that the fingers lift off the piano at the very end of the shot. You don't get any of that wobbliness on the colors or the shading at all. It's just straight solid lift off, and it's, while very surprisingly smooth here, I think that's just because the person who had this shot, again, just had this shot, didn't have to put any extra like spice onto the movement. There was no like real reason to. So for this one, I wanted to focus on the actual shading of the fingers here, and specifically right here at the fingertips. It's reflecting the white off of the keys below, and even though there's of course the shadow here, and you can see that separation with the light here just kind of being a harsh line, usually contact points wouldn't have that sort of reflection. Due to the gloves, it would. Like if you put your bare finger down on the piano, it's not going to reflect back much light, no matter how bright it is. But when you have something that's a little bit more available for that, like a slightly reflective, glossy, in this case most likely, glove, that would reflect a little bit more. That's also why you're getting the same kind of thing up here, higher on the glove and on the finger that's floating up, as well as in the reflection too. Great additional detail. Well, another one of those things where they probably didn't have to do that, and honestly, it probably would look about the same if they didn't. Point being, it looks great, and I love that they added contact shading, which is super, super minor. Like, the fact that they have that sheen on there at all is impressive to me. And on this shot, another detail that I love that they threw in here, this one is a lot more common, but I just think it looks great in the context of the shot composition here. You have the character to focus on, you have this large background wall, and then you have this like pillar set and this ground, which is all on one set of layer, and they have the parallax effect being utilized as the camera moves down and away. So as the camera moves into the next shot and does this like rotated out transition, you can see that the floor here moves up faster than the background, And that's a subtle thing, but the parallax effect is something you experience in everyday life. The further away something is, the slower it perceivably moves to the human eye. So when you replicate that in animation, you basically have to make the skyline or whatever's on the skyline basically move not at all, and have the other layers that would be in front of it be moving a little bit quicker, that sort of concept. So basically everything on screen that would be a significant distance from each other, at least enough to make that effect happen, can make the entire shot go from looking very flat and boring to 3D, dynamic, and livable, much like this. This no longer feels like a flat 2D background with a flat 2D character. It feels like I am being physically, in reality, pulled away from the shot I'm looking at, and it tricks the brain into perceiving that distance between the things on screen. Again, it's an insanely popular and almost required thing to do for these heavy distance shots where you have multiple focal points on screen, but it is one that, for this shot especially, they probably could have easily gotten away with without having that there. But this project is full of that whole concept of, we didn't need to, but we're going to make this look as good as possible. A lot of these little details, a lot of the projects I look at have those little details. This one is just cranked up to 11. It is so minute and so attentive to every little thing on screen, and I love it. And this is kind of funny because this literally contradicts the exact last statement I had about them not cutting any corners and putting all that effort in to do every little detail on screen. This one they cheated, but I understand why. So right here, you see this last bit of animation. Everything up to this had a little bit of movement happening, then boom, static image, no movement, a little bit of dust. You know, like there's nothing else moving on here. This is a solid one layer illustration. There's no animation here. It's just a flat illustration. And they hide it in the middle like nobody's gonna notice, but ya boy noticed. Alright, so here we've landed on basically the last thing I wanted to talk about, at least in extent, because this is probably the least effective quality animation that they threw in here. I do not want to say that this looks bad, because objectively, this shot looks great, but because of how they had to composite it, it does look a little bit jank, especially compared to the rest of the project. Right here, as this sand is falling away from these like floating, I don't know if they're like crystals or like some like floating island situation, you can see that this is, of course, just kind of floating in front of and falling off of in a really weird way. So you can see how the sand here doesn't really feel like it's actually connected to these like floating islands behind it. It is, obviously, when you slow it down especially, you can see that it's an entirely separate asset, drawn entirely independently with the background just kind of as a reference, and then they just made it fall relative to where those would be on screen. But the unfortunate part of that is when you do this sort of thing and you don't have any sort of shading or any sort of like physics that connects to the thing it's supposed to be falling off of or interacting with, it therefore doesn't look like it is. So this just ends up looking like sand falling relatively close-ish in shape to this background, especially because they do move at slightly different frames here. Like they're on alternating frames, so they don't feel like they're actually locked in together. Like right there, you can see the sand not move as the background does, and that happens every other frame. Because animating on twos is fine. That's a standard. But when you have to offset them in order to get this movement to kind of work in shot, this ends up happening where things feel detached and not quite as coherent as they could. And I understand why they did this again. This is because they didn't want to render a bunch of sand for this whole shot here, because that would be insane. The particle rendering for that would be nuts. That'd be stupid. Honestly, this makes a lot more sense when it comes to time management. But it would have looked really cool if it was CG. Like a Honkai Impact video I watched just recently had a similar thing with sand, but it felt clay-like and clumpy because they didn't want to animate a bunch of individual particle effects on a simulator, because that's nuts. The time that takes is stupid. The resources on a computer that takes is stupid. This makes more sense, especially when you already have the project kind of mixing these 3D, 2D assets all around. It's not dumb. It's just unfortunate that as a byproduct of being smart with your time and decisions like this, the quality of what is otherwise an insanely high level animation ends up being hit just a little bit. It's minor, but it's worth mentioning. And real quick, as a follow-up to that previous point about that still illustration, this happens here too, but the difference between the two of them is in the details, quite literally. The last one is a full rendered, high quality illustration, and while that does make sense because a lot of the detail leading up to that point was forming its own identity and you were going into it with all that visual information, this one fits better because it's just a still frame of this character drawn in the animation itself. It is just an animation drawing. It's designed a little bit more simply. You have all of the shading and everything you're already visually familiar with, but it doesn't feel out of place as much because the lacking of extra details like that one had. There was a little bit too much in comparison to this. They should have taken this approach with that other still shot of her just standing there. That would have, in my opinion, fit a lot better, and nobody really would have noticed the difference. The other illustration is beautiful, but when it comes down to fitting it into the project visually, I think that this approach here makes much more sense and feels better. And just real quick mention here, this walking is definitely rotoscoped, so that makes me even think more that that hand from the first shot is. These were probably done by the same people. These legs rotate too perfectly to not be rotoscoped. I would bet my literal soul that this was rotoscoped off of a real-life recording of somebody's legs just walking away from the camera, because this rotation on these feet, that doesn't happen when you don't have a reference to work off of, you know? Like, this is beautiful, and I love the way it looks, and it's immediately followed up by another example of this, which is the still illustration being used again, all this high-end detail, all these shadows and lights in places that really don't feel like they fit with the rest of the animation, even in the best of times. But what this one does is have lighting effects here. You see the light kind of reflect off of that jewel on the headpiece, and of course the light going across the frame from the left to right. So it just feels more alive here. This is something they probably should have done to that first still illustration, instead of it just feeling like a leftover art piece that was like a placeholder, because that's kind of what the first one felt like. It's like the animator forgot to replace it with the actual shot. I know that's not the case, but again, that's what happens with the visual language when you have something with too much detail mixed in with other things that, while detailed, aren't nearly the same quality at the end of the day. And with all that said and done, this video is rolling on 42 minutes of raw footage I'm now gonna have to edit down, and that's about the length it takes me to get through my like 6-minute plus long animation analysis videos. So I had a lot to say about this one, and I'm sure it's going to be reflected in the final runtime of this video, but there was so much to talk about that I couldn't help myself. So if you like this video and you like seeing me talk about animation stuff and you want to see more of me doing that, I have an entire playlist of other animation analysis stuff I've done. So if you have an interest in animation at all, it's probably worth a watch for you. But otherwise, if you like this video and you want to see more stuff like this, let me know what I should get to down in the comments below, and I will do my best to get to it. But if you just like this video and you want to follow me and support me for all the other reaction and analysis stuff I do, you know how to follow me and support me and all that, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!